Hi everyone, and welcome to Mike Likes Robots. Today we're going to be talking about costs for an AWS account. If you've been watching any of my videos and thinking, that sounds cool, but I don't know how much it would cost, and that puts me off, this video is for you. We'll be talking about how to set up an AWS account, how to predict costs before they happen, how to set budgets, and how to optimize costs after they've been incurred. Just a note, there's already a series on this in depth on the AWS official YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description. That goes into far more detail. This is more of a general overview. First, you might be asking yourself, do I really need an AWS account? And no, you don't need an AWS account. You could build everything yourself from scratch. To me, it's similar to asking the question, do I really need this library for my code to work? And no, you could build it yourself. At the cost of time, you could write the software, debug it, maintain it after release, and in this real case, deploy the hardware and maintain it. Or you could use someone else's service that's been proven to work, has high security, and can scale at any moment. And if you're using someone's existing service, AWS is one of the best. So let's look at how to create an AWS account. Here we are on the AWS homepage, aws.amazon.com. And we can create an AWS account with this button at the top. We'll provide it an email address. Once the verification code arrives, we can verify. Now for this, the fields are fairly self-explanatory, so I'll fill them out and then skip to the next page. And then you do need to enter a credit card. It does say that it will not charge you for usage between AWS free tier limits. So if you're careful, and I'll explain more about how to figure out what is free tier and what isn't, but if you're careful, you can avoid any charges to your card. So again, I'll fill out these fields and continue to the next step. Finally, you can select a support plan. In case of any issues that you have, you can request better support. Basic support is free for me, so I'll continue with that, but feel free to read the options and decide what's best for you. And that's it, our account is created. Now the account is created, the first step I would take is to set up the IAM Identity Center. The IAM Identity Center is one of the services in the AWS console, so we can search for it in the toolbar and pull it up here. And inside, we'll click Enable. Now, what the service is doing for us is allowing to register users and groups of users and define what permissions they're able to have. So we can define a user that is able to have admin access to our console that we can sign in as using the AWS CLI. So here we've enabled, it does normally pop up a box to select whether to use AWS organizations or not. I would recommend doing so. It will match the screen here better and there's no cost to it. So from here we can click the user screen and click Add User. And I'm just going to do a username of Mike. I'm going to select to generate a one-time password, and then I'll use the same details that I used to create the account with. I'll leave all of the optional fields with their default values. Now, because this is a personal account, I won't make a group, but you could make groups for admin users, DevOps users, read-only users, and then organize users into those groups to prevent or to make it easier to set up permissions. But in this case, I'll have one user with admin privileges, and that's it. Now I'll copy these sign-in details, and then I want to enable this user to access this account. So I'll go to the AWS Account section, and then inside here, I've got this account. Now, because of AWS organizations, I could potentially have multiple accounts here to help divide up resources, but I'll have one account, select the user, Mike, to add. Because there's no permissions set yet, I'll click Create Permission Set and open up this separate tab. And we can do a predefined permission set or a custom permission set. All I want is administrator access, so I'm going to use this predefined permission set, but you can fine-tune what a user is able to do using this option. With next, I'll leave everything the same except for session duration. I'm going to bump that up. Again, as it's a personal account, I'm happy to increase the duration here. That's it. That should be our permission set created. So I can close that tab, refresh this table, and tick administrator access. That should be everything to get Mike administrator access to this account. Now I'll sign in and show you what the sign in page looks like. sign in is complete. From here, I currently have one thing that I have access to. If I added more accounts, I'd have access to that. Or if I added managed applications like Grafana instances, I'd have access in this portal. So for Mike Likes Robots, I can click here and I can select the management console to sign in to Mike's management console, where I get administrator access. Or I can click command line or programmatic access, which gives me details for setting up single sign-on or for configuring the CLI. So we'll be using these details to set up SSO so that we get command line access. Let's switch to VS Code and see how that's set up. Now here we are in VS Code. The AWS CLI is already installed, so we want to configure single sign-on. There's a few different ways that we can set up CLI credentials, but this is my preferred because it allows for automatic refresh of credentials just by signing into the management console. So to do that, I'll use AWS configure SSO and then give it a session name. I'll just call it N. It doesn't matter in this case. And then the start URL comes from the browser. So if we switch back to the browser, and here we've got our start URL and our region. So we can copy this URL and paste it into the tool. And then I'll type my region as US West 2. I'll leave the registration scope as default, and then it opens this page to request access to the AWS account that is signed in. So I'll click confirm and continue, and then allow it to have access to my data. It's already set up the role available because it's the only one available, which is administrator access. It is possible to have multiple roles for a single user, and then through the SSO, you can configure which one you want to use. However, it's already got the right one, so we're going to accept the defaults on these. That profile name is fine as well. Now we should be able to call using the command line. So if we do AWS SPS get caller identity, with no profile, it has an error occurred. That's because we've set up using this profile. So we're going to grab that and add it onto the end. Now we can see our credentials are working. The user is Mike, and my assumed role is administrator access. Now, if it turns out that these credentials aren't working, all we need to do is do AWS SSO login, and it will go through that same browser authentication workflow. Also, if we don't want to have to type this profile in every time, we can do this setup using -- profile default, because that is the default profile used, and then we can just omit that argument from all of our CLI arguments. And with that, we've completed the account creation and single sign-on steps that we need to have CLI access. Now, let's take a look at how to predict costs, set budgets, and optimize costs once they've been incurred. So the next thing we want to look at is how we can predict possible costs for the services we want to use. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. The first way that you can do this is by looking at the specific service for the cost it charges. So for instance, let's look at IoT Core. Here on the right in the pricing box, it shows the cost calculator, which we'll look at in a moment, and it also shows the pricing details, which lists out what IoT Core costs for what operations, which is basically devices connected and number of messages received. So you can look through this and figure out exactly what your planned usage of the service would cost. But we can also use the pricing calculator to get this for us as well. Another point to mention here is that there is a free tier available with new accounts, that is, accounts less than 12 months old. And every service that offers a free tier option will list out exactly what is included in that. And there is an example given that for a 50 device workload, each device connects constantly and exchanges 300 messages a day. That would be covered by the free tier entirely. So there's quite a lot of flexibility for setting up and trying out within the free tier, so without spending a single cent. The other method that we can try and get a price estimate is using the service for it, the cost calculator. The URL is calculator.aws, and I'll include that in the description. And you can see it's auto-forwarded us to the IoT Core page. Now, the next thing to understand about pricing for services is that it can vary by region. Not every service, not every region, but for pricing calculators, it's best to set the correct region that you're planning to use it in to get the most accurate costs. So for us, the region is already set to US West, which is correct. So I would be using IoT Core with MQTT. I would have, let's say, 10 robots that I want to connect. And then from this connectivity box, I will select that they're constantly connected, so 43,800 minutes. From that, I can show you the calculations And it looks like it would cost me 4 cents to connect 10 devices constantly. So that's useful to know. The next box is messaging. Let's say that I want to I want to send one message per second constantly, which is that many, and then the average size of each message, which should be much less than a kilobyte, so we should be fine there. And we can show from the calculations that that would result in $26.30. Now we could, if we want to, at this point, tune how many messages. So if our devices aren't on constantly, let's say they're on for roughly half the day each, but they're still producing one message per second, we could halve this value or just halve the cost down to roughly $13. Another advantage of the pricing calculator is that you can price multiple things at the same time. So we're going to save our IoT core calculation and then add another service. Let's say we want to add camera streaming. So we can configure Kinesis video streams as well. Again, we've got the region already set. We've got our 10 robots that we're streaming data from constantly. And it gives 720p, has a bitrate of around 512 kilobits per second. So we'll use that figure as an estimate. And then for ingestion, we'll ingest for 24 hours a day. So all of our video that is being streamed will be saved. Consumption, I'm going to leave this because there's no planned consumption, so it would be a negligible cost. I'll leave WebRTC, assuming that we're not using it, as well as for these other services. So given that, we can see our total monthly cost amounts to $13.60. So we can save and view summary, and for 10 robots, constantly streaming camera data, constantly connected to IoT Core and producing one message per second, our total cost is around $40. So that's a great way that we can predict our costs in advance and tune how we want to use AWS to make that work. Now that we've seen how to use the pricing calculator, let's take a look at how to set a budget. And for that, we can go to the billing and cost management tool or service within AWS. We can see here that access is denied because there's no real costs yet. So what we'll do is we'll set up a budget, and this is what will allow us to track how much we spent and when we're going overboard. So we can use a template or we can customize for advanced settings. One advantage of customizing is that you can set an Amazon SNS topic, which is the simple notification service. And that's a way that you can attach your cell phone to the budget. So if the budget is exceeded, you receive an SMS saying that you've exceeded the budget. So if you want a text saying you've gone over budget, you might need to go through the advanced workflow. But if you only want an email, you can use the template simplified view. The zero spend budget is what I would recommend if you're just starting out. It will let you know if you spent anything outside of the free tier. I'll leave the budget name as the same. I'll add an email recipient, and then I'll create this budget. Now that our budget has been created, we can open it up and take a look at the details. So we can see that the budget amount is set for $1. And if we check the alerts, we can see that there is an alert for whenever the cost exceeds 1 cent. So if we spend anything on this account, the alert will go out. Up to 10 email addresses and one SNS topic with cell phone numbers attached will be alerted that the budget has been exceeded. We can also edit this budget to increase that. Say we're happy with the AWS service, it's working for what we need, and we're happy to start increasing our usage. We can still make sure that we're not spending more than we intended. So we've seen cost prediction and we've seen setting a budget. Now let's take a look at the billing to see how the costs break down and how we can optimize our costs. And for that, I'm going to sign into another AWS account with a much higher spend on it. So we're here in this other AWS account, and we can see a much higher spend, nearly $200 so far in the month, forecasted up to $330, and one budget over budget. And that's because I have a zero spend budget on this account to experiment with, and we've clearly blown that. So let's take a look at how this breaks down. We can use the Cost Explorer to see how our costs have changed over time. So this chart is a great visualization, but we can see even better figures if we open this up and see what the spend is per month. So we can see the service total and per month exactly what was spent. So if we're trying to optimize our costs, we can see whether something was effective over time instead of just comparing two figures to each other. If we take a look at the Bills tab, we can see the highest estimated cost has gone down, and it also breaks down in the bill exactly what the money has gone on. So we'll take a look at EC2 and we'll take a look at one of the smaller charges to give some examples of what comes up on this balance sheet. As I mentioned, different regions have different charges, so this is subdivided by region. You might find that if your account is spending money and you're not sure where, it might be a resource in another region that you didn't realize was running. So you can check other regions, or you can check your billing report and see exactly what regions are active and spending money. So in this case, we can see there's 324 hours of a Linux EC2 instance, a pretty small one, so it didn't amount to very much for a whole month's use. We can see EBS, which is Elastic Block Storage. So that's the drive that I attached to my instance to give it some more storage space. And we can see that comes out at about $2, $2.50 per 20 gigabyte storage. We can also see Elastic IP addresses. These are a great way of giving your VM a fixed IP address if you're turning it off and on again, and you're only charged for the time where it's not attached to a running instance. So in this case, I clearly have a lot of hours with this Elastic IP not attached. So if I wanted, I could tidy up this particular charge by deallocating that Elastic IP and freeing that charge. Another place that I could reduce costs is this C5.x large, which it says is 17 cents per hour. So for me, this is costing $55, and it's on a lot more than I need it to be on. So something I can do is make more of an effort to shut down the instance when it's not in use, or even to set up an automated way of shutting it down if it's not in use. We can see quite a lot more storage here, and again, more Elastic IP costs that I could cut down. So this is how we can break down our costs and look at places to save money. Now, Elastic Compute Cloud, EC2, is a server-driven technology, meaning you are allocating servers to do the tasks that you need. It's often more cost-effective to use serverless technologies. For instance, if I wanted to run a web app, I could deploy it to an EC2 instance which is running constantly, or I could use AWS serverless technologies to only do calculations and run functions when I need them to be run, and then I'll only be charged for the time those functions are running. It might end up as slightly more per second of actual calculation performed, but that would save me money because I don't have this instance running all the time when I don't need it to be. So that's one of the more expensive costs that we can look at. And then further down, we can look at S3, for example. And I've got 3 different regions that have S3 costs. And if I open up the most expensive one here in US West, we can see this storage, around 6 gigabytes per month, and that's costing 14 cents. So I could tidy that up if I want, but it seems like S3 is cheap enough that I don't really need to worry about that particular cost. So this is a great way to verify where the money is going and what services are worth keeping. And the last line of defense when it comes to your AWS account is the AWS Support, which I would give a favorable mention to. This is my personal story. I can't promise it would be the same for you. But some years ago, when I had some university credits and I was trying to learn some AWS technologies, I ended up doing it pretty badly. I didn't realize that storage that wasn't allocated to an EC2 instance still cost money, for example, along with a number of other things. So while I tried to provision my own game servers and web portals to control them, I didn't do it very effectively and ended up burning through all of my credits. When I told AWS Support about this, they helped me track down every instance and every resource that I was using and shut them all down to stop burning through my credits. They even showed me that I had resources running in regions that I didn't even realize because of the very first time that I'd set up AWS and didn't understand regions. So through AWS Support, I was able to close down everything, stop burning my credits, and they even gave me a refund because they could see that I hadn't used those resources in that time. For me, that was a very positive experience. So overall, we've seen how to sign up for an AWS account. We've seen how to predict costs for particular services, how to set budgets to make sure that we don't spend too much, and how to look back at our cost reports and understand where we can try and drive costs down. With that, I can only encourage you to open an AWS account and start using some free tier services for yourself. You could try sending some ROS2 data into IoT Core, as I show in my video that I'll link at the top. Thank you for watching, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next one.